And welcome back to Daily Wrap. It's potluck time. Tom, this is the part of the show where we go around the table and we share our favorite stories of the day. This is your first time here, and
Yes.
I decide who goes first.
Oh, okay.
And the fact that we match means
The purple.
Well, all
as we
three
would
of
say.
you are with the purple.
yeah.
And I'm the
You didn't get the
communist.
memo.
I'm the
Right,
commie
right,
with the
right.
red, right?
You said it.
Yeah,
No one else
yeah,
accused
right,
you.
right.
You said it.
Tom, purple is the new black. That's the
That's right.
bottom
There
line.
you go.
Right.
All set.
Anyway, set the table for you. Go ahead.
Well, set the table. I guess I'll promote a commentary that I wrote for Conservative Review about Obama and climate change. And for those who are really watching carefully, it turns out that President Obama is now talking about the alleged health effects of climate change, which is a shift away from polar bears and ice caps. Now, why would he be doing this? Well, it turns out this is based on a strategy memo from the Environmental Protection Agency in 2009 that was unearthed through a FOIA request, a Freedom of Information request. And what they were concerned about is the public really doesn't care about things they can't relate to, like polar bears and ice caps, but they can relate to health. So it was recommended that the communications about climate change move to the health agenda. That's why Obama's now talking about health. But here's the real problem here. There's a real downside risk. It turns out that the theory is that more wildfires will create more outdoor air pollution, and then you get more asthma and other adverse health effects. The problem is air pollution has been going down and asthma has been going up. And a latest study, a new study of Johns Hopkins, said that poverty was linked to asthma, not outdoor air pollution.
Really?
So there's a possibility, and when we know electricity prices skyrocketing, what's that going to do? It could drive people to more poverty, and then ironically could also cause more disease. One final point, in the last 2 weeks, 10 people have died because of carbon monoxide poisoning because they couldn't pay their utility bill. And they had powered their homes with gasoline generators. So actually had people dying because of high electricity prices.
Wow.
So I think this is something that we really need to carefully consider about the adverse effects of propaganda.
Interesting. Rick.
You know, it's interesting. Tom and I were talking about this before we started the show, and we both agree what we wouldn't give for honest science. You know, we look at the climate change argument, you find science on one side saying, oh, it's terrible, it's real, and then you find science on the other side saying, no, it's not what you're saying it is. Somebody like me, who's not a scientist, Tom actually is, I don't know what to believe. You know, I end up erring on the side of, well, let's do the best we can and not get too crazy because I don't know what's real.
According to our TV, the world apparently is on fire.
But this should be a priority on the agenda of the American public. Demand that whatever these lobbying factors on any side are that are perverting it, it's got to stop. It's got to stop. We have to get honest science.
Brad, last word.
Yeah, the issue shopping in order to peddle an agenda is always a really bad idea. It turns out everyone does it. The fear of more crime, which we know is going down, drives one agenda. The fear of more air pollution drives this agenda, and we know it's absolutely not true. So I think you're right. Get better science, we'll get better policy.
There you
There you
go.
go. Rick, you are number 2 tonight.
I am?
You are.
What am I talking about?
Well, you are talking about tonight Kirsten Powers.
Kirsten Powers. Kirsten Powers, as I'm sure many people know, is a contributor over at Fox News and has a reputation for being a liberal contributor over there. What I've always liked about Kirsten is that she says what she's thinking, even if it's out of step with what you may think you would get from a liberal. I like to think that maybe I follow in her footsteps in that regard. She wrote a piece in USA Today that I think deserves to be pointed out to everybody. She complained, as many have, that President Obama seems to be going out of his way to not discuss the murder of Christians around the world. I think she used the case of the Christians who were shot on a boat and thrown overboard because they were Christian. Muslims shot them and killed them. We saw this happen with ISIL. We're looking at pictures of it right now. It happened either yesterday or the day before. We've seen it before, and I got to weigh in and agree with her. I understand the administration's sensitivity to not saying things that will get Americans overly steamed at innocent Muslims who should not be blamed for these terrible things that we're seeing. But you know what? You've got to call it as it is. And if you don't call it like it is, then there are bad things that result from that. We're seeing terrible things being done to Christians. We're seeing anti-Semitism growing, I'm afraid, by leaps and bounds in various parts of Europe. the president has to address it. It's time. I understand what his policy may have been up until this point. I know people argue over whether it's appropriate or not appropriate. Fine. The policy was what it was. It's time now for the president to come out and talk about what really is and formulate a plan for dealing with, because the time has come that we can't keep seeing these images. We have to do something about
Brad,
it.
15 seconds.
No one is ever helped by pandering. We have to defend most of the Muslim world which doesn't believe in this, and we've got to be ready to fight the part of the Islamic world that is doing it, or we are going to see a Christian genocide that we will never, ever live down.
Feels like we're seeing the start of one already. Anyway, we have to take a quick break, but don't worry, when we come back, more potluck, including mine. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax. Welcome back to the Daily Wrap. I'm your host, Joe Concha, and if you're just joining us, we're in the middle of our potluck, you know, where we share our favorite stories of the day and stuff. Brad Hirschfield, you're batting third tonight.
I am, with a bitter dish. His name is Oscar Groening. He's 93 years old, and he's in court in Germany. He was a guard and a supervisor and accountant in Auschwitz, and witnessed directly the murder of 300,000 innocents and hundreds of thousands more during his service there. And the question is, do we really belong trying a 93-year-old man? Does it really make sense to do? At some point, is this just vengeful? The answer is yes, we have every reason to do it, and no, it's not about vengeance. The truth is, I can even say, I don't know how he should be punished. Right? Maybe he shouldn't go to jail for the rest of his life. But when this guy walks into court and says what he said is, I'm morally guilty, I acknowledge that. But as to the law, I leave that to you, the court. He's actually recommitting the sins he committed 70 years ago, because he can't imagine that it's a clear-cut case that when you participate in genocide, you're not just morally responsible, you're legally responsible. And as this last generation of victims vanishes, we owe it to them to do with the law what the law would not do for them 70 years ago, and hold people accountable. I'm sorry, Mr. Groening. Saying you're sorry and you're morally accountable is not enough. If we expect to head off future genocides, let alone comfort the victims who still walk among us, then you have got to be held legally responsible. I'm not calling, forgive me, for a pound of his flesh, and as I said, I'm not suggesting he necessarily needs to spend the rest of his life in jail. But the law, which failed millions during the Holocaust, now needs to be used to bring justice to those who are still walking among us.
Brad, you really should think about getting into public speaking. And I don't mean to bring any levity here, but that was passionate and it was dead on, but I'd love to hear Rick's thoughts.
Yeah, because I thought a lot about this and looked into it. He was a sergeant at the time this was all happening. He was an accountant. Had he stood up and said, this is wrong, what do you imagine would have happened to him? He'd either have been to the front or he'd be in the, the same position.
Right. Because there are times we stand up, Rick, not because we think we can turn the tide of history, but because we don't know it'll happen if we don't.
He would have died if he had stood up.
He also volunteered for the SS, and he volunteered for the SS because he said he was proud of what they were doing.
Well, that's
we want to be very clear. Yeah. So again, I'm not suggesting, you know, shoot the guy.
What do you do with him at 92?
So I think we have to think about that. But you know what? I want to make that decision on the backside of the legal system fixing today what it failed to do 70 years ago. It's about convicting him, because laws were used to justify murder.
But he will be convicted because he admitted it.
Right.
We hope.
You know, it's obviously, you know, horrible testimony, what he talked about, what he actually did. Right. But I think there's actually value in him actually speaking. Because too much of history is in a book where you have to read it. Right. You have a live testimony, as warped and as twisted as it is, that I think can really narrow those decades. And I would send him on a speaking tour or something like that.
That's certainly a part of it. There's no question.
Punished.
Holocaust denial is rising. And this guy can say, you can't tell me it didn't happen because I helped make it happen.
It's real because there's a person.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, we'll have to see. I mean, obviously, there's a trial coming up, and we'll be sure to talk about it more here on the Daily Wrap with exactly what happens with this gentleman. Anyway, PBS is conducting an internal review after actor Ben Affleck, I got to transition out of Brad's soliloquy, which was marvelous, requested that some unsavory family history be left out of his episode of Finding Your Roots that aired on October 14th. The premise of the show is that celebrities get together with ancestry experts and historians and look into their family trees. Sounds cool. Well, while shooting his episode, Mr. Affleck found out one of his distant relatives was a slave owner. The actor was upset and embarrassed by the discovery, who wouldn't be, and asked for that part to be removed from the episode, which it was, because PBS says they found more interesting ancestors of other actors to focus on instead. On his own Facebook page Tuesday, this is what Ben Affleck wrote. After an exhaustive search of my ancestry for Finding Your Roots, it was discovered that one of my distant relatives was an owner of slaves. I was embarrassed. The very thought left a bad taste in my mouth. I regret my initial thoughts that the issue of slavery not be included in the story. We deserve neither credit nor blame for our ancestors, and the degree of interest in the story suggests that they are, as a nation, still grappling with the terrible legacy of slavery. It is an examination well worth continuing. Boy, there's a long post, Ben. I am glad that my story, however indirectly, will contribute to that discussion. So PBS.
He walked that one back.
Yeah, seriously. But I wonder if PBS, say, had Clint Eastwood on and they found that his relatives were slave owners, you think they're pulling that episode?
It would have been all over the place, and that's the real issue here. He has an opportunity to understand that when we fight about issues of slavery, we fight about all the wrong fights. Come clean, you're not being held accountable, and go forward.
And from a media perspective, PBS, boy, you've really dropped the ball on that one. Anyway, when we come back, it's yay or nay. This is the Daily Wrap, only on Newsmax.